Hello, my name is Margaret Henderson, and I need you to hear my story. Please stay with me until the end, and if this touches your heart, subscribe to this channel because there are many more powerful stories like mine waiting to be told. Stories of truth, betrayal, and the courage it takes to rebuild what was broken. I never imagined that a simple plastic doll would tear my family apart and then, somehow, bring us back together. But life has a way of surprising us, doesn't it? Let me take you back to where it all began, to a time when I thought I knew everything about my family, only to discover I knew nothing at all. It was a humid summer evening in 2019 when I found the box. I was 47 years old, living in the old family house in Connecticut that had belonged to my grandmother, Eleanor. She had passed away 3 months earlier, and I was finally gathering the courage to sort through her belongings. The attic was a labyrinth of memories, dusty trunks filled with photographs, letters, and remnants of a life fully lived. I had always been close to my grandmother. She raised me after my mother died when I was 8 years old. My father, Thomas, had remarried quickly, too quickly, to a woman named Diane who never quite accepted me as her own. Eleanor became my sanctuary, my protector, the one person who made me feel truly loved. As I opened an old leather trunk tucked in the corner of the attic, beneath layers of moth-eaten blankets, I found something that made my heart stop. It was a vintage Barbie doll from 1959, the original one, still in its box, pristine and untouched. But that wasn't what shocked me. Attached to the box was an envelope, yellowed with age, with my grandmother's handwriting, "For Margaret when the time is right." It's the truth about our family's fortune. My hands trembled as I opened the envelope. Inside was a letter written in my grandmother's elegant script, along with old photographs and what appeared to be legal documents. As I began to read, the floor seemed to disappear beneath me. "My dearest Margaret," the letter began, "if you're reading this, I am gone. And it's time you knew the truth about where our family's wealth truly came from. The story I'm about to tell you will change everything you believe about us, about your father, and about the choices I made to protect you." The letter went on to explain something I had never known. In 1959, my grandmother Eleanor hadn't been just a housewife, as I'd always believed. She had been a talented toy designer working for a small company in California. She had sketched dozens of doll designs, revolutionary concepts for the time, showing dolls that could inspire girls to dream beyond the limited roles society had set for them. One of her designs had been particularly special, a fashion doll that was elegant, modern, and represented the independent woman of the future. She had poured her heart into this creation, believing it could change how young girls saw themselves. But when she presented it to her employer, a man named Harold Brenner, he had dismissed her entirely. Women, he said, didn't have the vision needed for such important business decisions. Devastated but determined, Eleanor had continued working on her design at home. She had shown it to her husband, my grandfather William, who encouraged her to patent it independently. They were about to do exactly that when something happened that would haunt our family for decades. Harold Brenner visited their home one evening. He apologized profusely for his earlier dismissal and asked to see Eleanor's designs again. Trusting and eager for validation, she showed him everything: her sketches, her notes, her vision for marketing the doll. He praised her work, asked if he could take photographs to show potential investors, and promised to make her a full partner in the venture. That was the last Eleanor saw of her designs. 3 months later, Brenner launched a doll that was nearly identical to Eleanor's creation, claiming it as his own innovation. When Eleanor threatened legal action, Brenner's lawyers buried her in paperwork, tied her up in court proceedings that my grandparents couldn't afford, and eventually, through intimidation and financial pressure, forced her to sign away all claims to the design. But here's where the story took a dark turn that I never could have anticipated. The letter continued, "What I never told anyone, Margaret, not even your grandfather before he died, was that I kept the original prototype, the one Brenner never saw. I also kept all my original sketches, dated and notarized by a lawyer friend who believed in me. For years, I was too afraid to do anything with them. Brenner was powerful, and I had a family to protect. But then, in 1987, something happened that changed everything. My grandmother explained that she had been contacted by a journalist who was writing an exposé about corruption in the toy industry. He had found evidence that Brenner had stolen designs from multiple creators. Eleanor saw her chance for justice, but there was a problem. By then, my father Thomas had become a successful executive, and unbeknownst to Eleanor, he had business dealings with companies connected to Brenner's empire. When Eleanor told Thomas she was planning to go public with her story, he begged her not to. He claimed it would ruin not just his career, but the entire family's reputation and financial stability. He promised that if she stayed quiet, he would take care of her forever, ensure she lived comfortably, and that I would never want for anything. Eleanor, weary from decades of fighting and wanting to protect her family, agreed. But she made Thomas sign a private agreement that he would set up a trust fund for me. Funded with what he claimed was his own money, but what Eleanor suspected came from his dealings with Brenner's network. She never asked too many questions because she wanted to believe her son was honorable, but the story didn't end there. The final pages of the letter contained the revelation that shattered everything I thought I knew. Margaret, your father did keep his promise to me, but the money in your trust fund didn't come from his honest work. Last year, I discovered that Thomas had been secretly selling the story rights to our family's history, my stolen designs and all, to various media companies. Always under confidentiality agreements, always painting himself as the tragic hero whose mother had falsely accused an innocent businessman. He's been profiting from my silence, from my stolen dreams, for over 30 years. The vintage Barbie I've left you, the one in this box, is worth a fortune to collectors, but it's worth even more as evidence. Inside the doll's original packaging, I've hidden microfilm copies of all my original designs. These are your inheritance, Margaret, not the tainted money your father placed in your trust fund. Use them to finally tell the truth, or bury them as I did. The choice is yours, but know this, silence has its own price, and I've paid it my entire life. I sat in that attic for hours, the letter clutched in my hands, tears streaming down my face. Everything I believed about my family was a lie. My father, whom I'd always seen as strict but principled, had been profiting from my grandmother's pain. The money that had paid for my education, my comfortable life, all of it was built on betrayal and theft. But I wasn't that 8-year-old girl anymore, the one who had lost her mother and needed protecting. I was a woman who had spent her career as an investigative journalist, someone who had dedicated her life to uncovering truth. And now, the biggest story of my life was sitting in my lap. The next morning, I called my father. I told him I needed to see him immediately, that I had found something in grandmother's attic that we needed to discuss. His voice on the phone was casual, unsuspecting. "Sure, sweetheart. Come by the house tomorrow. Diane's making her famous pot roast." I almost laughed at the absurdity. Pot roast. As if we were going to have a pleasant family dinner, while I confronted him with evidence of decades of lies. When I arrived at my father's house, a sprawling estate in the suburbs that his business success had paid for, I found him in his study, the same room where he used to help me with homework when I was young. The irony wasn't lost on me. "Dad," I said, placing the box with the vintage Barbie on his desk, "we need to talk about Grandma Eleanor." The color drained from his face. For a moment, I saw something flicker in his eyes. Fear? Guilt? Maybe both. "Where'd you find that?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "In the attic. Along with her letter, the one where she tells me everything." He stood up abruptly, turning his back to me, staring out the window at his perfectly manicured lawn. "Your grandmother was a wonderful woman, but she held grudges, Margaret. She never got over what happened with Brenner, and over the years, she started to imagine conspiracies that didn't exist." "Don't," I said sharply. "Don't you dare gaslight me about my own grandmother. I've spent the last 2 days verifying everything in her letter. I tracked down the journalist she mentioned. He's retired now, but he still has his notes. I found records of your confidentiality agreements." I even located Harold Brenner's son, who, by the way, is quite willing to talk about his father's shady business practices now that the old man is dead. My father turned around, and for the first time in my life, I saw him as he really was. Not the strong, successful man I'd idolized as a child, but someone small and desperate, someone who had chosen money and reputation over truth. "What do you want, Margaret?" he asked coldly. "I want you to tell me the truth. All of it. Why did you do this? Why did you profit from Grandma's pain?" He sank into his chair, suddenly looking much older than his 70 years. "You want the truth? Fine. Your grandmother was brilliant, but she was naive. She thought the world operated on fairness and justice. It doesn't. When Brenner took her designs, she could have moved on, created something new, but she couldn't let it go. It consumed her. And yes, when I saw an opportunity to turn that obsession into something profitable, I took it." "You sold her story," I said, disgust heavy in my voice. "You made her suffering into entertainment. I ensured our family's future," he shouted, slamming his hand on the desk. "Do you think the modest salary I made at my first job could have paid for your private schools, your college education, this house? I did what I had to do to give us a good life." "You did what you had to do?" I repeated, my voice shaking with rage. "You betrayed your own mother. You made her complicit in her own exploitation. And you built my entire life on that foundation of lies. What are you going to do?" he asked, and I heard the fear in his voice. "I'm going to do what Grandma should have done 60 years ago. I'm going to tell the truth. All of it. I've already contacted a publisher. They're very interested in the real story of Eleanor Henderson, the woman whose designs helped inspire a cultural revolution but who never received credit. I'm writing a book, Dad, and I'm donating every penny of my trust fund to a foundation I'm creating in Grandma's name. One that will support women designers and inventors whose work has been stolen or undervalued." "You'll destroy this family," he said quietly. "No," I replied, standing up to leave. "You already did that. I'm just cleaning up the mess." The following months were among the hardest of my life. My father refused to speak to me. Diane called me ungrateful and cruel. Some of my extended family sided with them, believing I should have kept the family secret buried with my grandmother. But others, particularly my younger cousin Rachel, who had always felt like an outsider in our family, reached out to support me. The book I wrote, The Stolen Dreams of Eleanor Henderson, was published a year after I found that letter in the attic. It became a bestseller, not just because of the scandal, but because Eleanor's story resonated with so many people. Women and men who had seen their ideas stolen, their contributions minimized, their voices silenced. The vintage Barbie doll with the microfilm hidden in its packaging became the centerpiece of an exhibition at a women's history museum. Eleanor's original designs, those beautiful sketches showing dolls that could be astronauts, doctors, athletes, and dreamers, were finally seen by the world. But the most unexpected twist came during the book tour. I was giving a talk in Los Angeles when an elderly woman approached me after the event. She had tears in her eyes as she shook my hand. "My name is Patricia Brenner," she said. "Harold Brenner was my uncle. I need to tell you something about your grandmother that you might not know." She explained that, in the 1960s, Harold had suffered a massive stroke that left him partially paralyzed and unable to speak clearly. During his final years, he had tried to communicate something to his family, repeatedly pointing to old photographs and files from his business. Patricia, who had been his caretaker, eventually understood what he was trying to say. He wanted to confess. He wanted to make amends for what he had stolen from Eleanor and others. He had even written a letter, with great difficulty, acknowledging Eleanor's rightful claim to the designs. But his business partners, afraid of the legal and financial implications, had hidden the letter and convinced the family that Harold's stroke had affected his judgment. Patricia handed me a folder. Inside was Harold Brenner's confession, written in shaky handwriting, dated 1971. "I've kept this all these years," she said, "because I didn't know what to do with it. I was young and scared of my family's reaction. But after reading your book, I knew your grandmother deserved this acknowledgement, even if it came too late." I held that letter in my hands and cried. Not just for my grandmother, but for all the years of pain that could have been avoided if people had simply chosen truth over profit, courage over convenience. The confession became an addendum to my book's second printing, and it opened the door for legal scholars to re-examine intellectual property cases from that era. Several women whose contributions had been erased from history were finally getting recognition, all because my grandmother had the foresight to preserve her evidence and the courage to tell me the truth, even from beyond the grave. As for my father, we didn't speak for almost 2 years. Then one day he called me. His voice was different, softer, broken. "I read your book," he said, "and I've been doing a lot of thinking. I was wrong, Margaret, about everything. I told myself I was protecting the family, but really I was just protecting my own ego and lifestyle. I'm sorry. I know that's not enough, but it's the truth. It took time, a lot of time, but slowly we began to rebuild our relationship. Not the old one, built on illusions and unexamined loyalty, but a new one, built on honesty and accountability. My father began volunteering with the foundation I created in Eleanor's name, using his business connections to help women protect their intellectual property. Diane never apologized, and we remained distant, but I made peace with that. Not every relationship can or should be saved. The Eleanor Henderson Foundation has now helped over 300 women secure patents, copyrights, and legal protection for their inventions and creative works. Every year, on the anniversary of my grandmother's death, we hold an exhibition showcasing the work of women whose contributions have been overlooked or stolen throughout history. And that vintage Barbie doll? It sits in a place of honor at the Foundation's headquarters. A reminder that sometimes the smallest things, a toy, a letter, a moment of courage, can change everything. Looking back now, 5 years after I found that box in the attic, I understand what my grandmother was really leaving me. It wasn't just evidence or even vindication. It was a choice. She was asking me to decide what kind of person I wanted to be, what kind of legacy I wanted to build. Would I choose comfort and silence, as she had been forced to do? Or would I choose truth, even when it was painful, even when it cost me relationships and security? I chose truth. And in doing so, I didn't just honor my grandmother's memory. I freed myself from a legacy of lies and built something new, something clean, something worthy of the love she had given me all those years ago. There are still hard days, days when I wonder if I did the right thing, if the cost was too high. But then I receive a letter from a young woman who patented her invention, because our foundation helped her navigate the legal system. Or I see my cousin Rachel, who now works as the foundation's director, thriving in a way she never could when our family's dysfunction kept her small and silent. And I think about my grandmother, Eleanor, sitting in that attic in 1959, sketching a doll that represented everything she dreamed women could be: independent, bold, unafraid to take up space in the world. She never got to see her dream fully realized in her lifetime, but I did. And I'm still fighting to make sure that other women don't have to sacrifice their dreams for someone else's profit. That's the real story of the doll that changed everything. Not just a piece of plastic that became a cultural icon, but a symbol of every woman who dared to dream big, who refused to be erased, who left behind truth for those brave enough to speak it. My name is Margaret Henderson, and this is my grandmother's story, my father's betrayal, and my own journey from comfortable lies to uncomfortable truth. If this story moved you, please subscribe to this channel, because there are so many more stories like this that need to be told. Stories of ordinary people who find extraordinary courage. Stories of families torn apart by secrets and rebuilt by truth. Stories that remind us that it's never too late to choose what's right over what's easy. Thank you for listening. Thank you for bearing witness. And thank you for being part of the community that believes truth matters. even when it's painful, especially when it's painful, because in the end, that's what sets us free.